We thank you, Holy Father, for this meeting of your people. We request your holy presence, Lord. We ask that you bless the speaker and bless the presentation. May be a blessing to all. And we thank you, Lord. We thank you for all that you do. And we pray in your holy and mighty name, in the name of Yeshua, in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Amen. Thank you.
Alrighty, so we're going to share the screen. Okay. So this, can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, awesome.
Loud and clear.
Awesome. And you can see my computer, it says World War I Australian Camp Meeting.
28.
Yes.
Awesome. Okay. Okay, so this is, a lot of it's based on Daniel 11:40, and this is a link to it. And it's in the notes that were sent out. And I'm gonna, it was an hour and a half long, so I'm gonna kind of read through it pretty quickly. And if I'm going too fast, just holler and pay attention because there's questions at the end. We're gonna do question and answer at the end, okay? So, and a hint, the questions are all bolded in the document.
Oh, pop quiz and you can cheat too. Thanks for the heads up.
Yeah. Okay, so.
Wait, the questions are what?
Bolded.
Oh, okay.
So you'll see the questions that will come up afterwards, so
Okay.
you can cheat. Okay, so this presentation was presented on November 9th, 2019. And it starts off, hello everyone, we are back together again. In our last presentations, we were in a different location. So just to note, they had moved the camp meeting from one place to another because they were evacuated due to those Australian fires, right? And so this is the first presentation after they all came back together, and it was on November 9th, 2019. So we were just completing the introduction into World War I. So I want to conduct a short revision or review of what brought us here. And then this afternoon, I hope we can discuss the First World War. It is a subject that really needs more time than we have to do it justice. So we are going to try and move fairly quickly. These are presentations online on the subject to fill in any gaps left in logic. So we all know that. She's gone over these presentations before, and there's lots of information to fill in any gaps. So what she's talking about here, before we start, she says, I want to address one subject. We know the date today is November 9th, 2019, and we know the significance. If we were to think about our reform line, how many US presidents have we had? And where do we start from? So starting from 1989 here, we had Reagan, and then George Bush Sr., Clinton, George Bush Jr., Obama, and then Trump. So how many presidents? That would be 6 presidents are featured on our reform line. If we wanted to connect these presidents to who they had most in common with, who would we connect them with, starting with Clinton? And one of the things that were similar to two people were they were both Democrats. So you connect Clinton with Obama. So who do we connect George Bush Sr. to? Well, there's George Bush Jr. And besides father and son, we'll see that there was a lot more to connect those two together. So what is this George Bush Sr. known for? And George Bush Sr. was known for getting us into the Iraq War. Another word for the Iraq War was Desert Storm. It was also called, well, at first we just called it the Iraq War, but because there was 2 Iraq wars after George Bush Jr., they ended up having to change the name to this one, and they changed it to Desert Storm, Desert Shield, the first Gulf War, the first Iraqi War. All those names are pertaining to the first war. And then this one right here in 2003 with George Bush Jr. becomes just the Iraq War. So Desert Storm was a war with who? And that was Iraq. This is an Iraq war known as the Gulf War, Desert Storm. The American public did not want this war. And what did he have to do to convince them that this war was justified? He had to lie. Well, they both had to lie for each of them. So for this war, the Desert Storm, they had a young girl stand up in front of Congress and say how those Iraqi troops in Kuwait had been taking babies from incubators and throwing them on the floor and leaving them there to die and stealing the incubators. This was a conspiracy theory that was stirred up to cause the American people to agree with an Iraq war. It was later realized that this poor girl from Kuwait, who everyone thought was this poor girl who worked in a hospital and who cried through her testimony and saw all those awful things, was actually the daughter of the ambassador of Kuwait to the United States. She had been put there by a firm that was paid hundreds of thousands of dollars to convince the American public for an Iraqi war. She was a daughter of the ambassador that was trained for that role. That part is not a conspiracy theory. The US government recognized that the ambassador from Kuwait had orchestrated this show in Congress to convince the American public. And the first Iraq war against Saddam Hussein is all based on lies, like father, like son. So we had the Iraq war, we had the lies, and their father and son, they're both Republicans, and that's how we can connect these two together. These two are Democrats, we can connect these two together. So, let's see, we have a question. Statement. The second Iraq war under George W. Bush Jr. was also referred to as the War on Terrorism, right? Possibly. I did not research that part. I was only looking at the Desert Storm and stuff because they were because her presentation was referring to the Desert Storm, and so I looked up that term to make sure I was figuring that out. But it's a possibility that War on Terrorism was also a part of the second Iraq war. You're right. Thank you, Sister Debbie, for pointing that out. So who is the son going to go to war with? There is going to be another Iraq war. In fact, they called the war George Bush Sr. started the Iraq war until George Bush Jr. started an Iraq war. Then they had to think of another name. So they started calling the one George Bush Sr. started the Gulf War or the first Iraqi war. What is the Iraq war Bush Jr. started based upon? And this was based upon weapons of mass destruction, another conspiracy theory. He was accusing them of having these huge weapons of mass destruction, which they never found, right? It was a complete conspiracy theory. So making the connections, we got like father, like son, Iraq war, Bush Sr., Bush Jr., son, father, and then we've got Clinton, Democrat, Obama, Democrat. We teach in this movement what principle? How do you know what the end looks like? Well, the end is based on the beginning. So we have that all through inspiration on whatever level we want to look at. You want to know the end, you look at the beginning. Why is this not working? Okay. Okay. So we began on the Diet of Eden. What are we going to finish on? The Diet of Eden. So looking at the end and the beginning, right? We began on equality. What are we going to finish on? We're going to finish on equality. We see that, the end from the beginning. All through inspiration and all through prophecy, God illustrates the end from the beginning. What does the first president on our reform line look like? The last president on our reform line. So if you want to figure out who this was, so like over here, we wanted to figure out this person, we look back here to figure out what this person's going to be like, right? So what was Reagan's occupation before he became involved in politics? He was a celebrity, a television actor. He was best known for portraying cowboys. but he was a celebrity and an actor. Reagan, outside the political establishment, is a celebrity in Hollywood. So you have a celebrity here. And how does Reagan get elected? Let's go back to the previous studies. There is a history before Reagan, this 10-year history, and we tied that back to the civil rights movement. You have the civil rights movement in America with people like Martin Luther King Jr. fighting for the end of segregation and the introduction of equality. And within this civil rights movement, they started to force the Christian conservative schools in the southern states of America to desegregate. They started forcing them to do that through withholding or abolishing tax exemption from any private schools that segregate. Okay, so am I talking too fast for anybody? Okay.
No, all good.
No, you're fine.
Okay. What did those Southern evangelicals believe about segregation? They believed that it was a biblically mandated principle. So they read the Bible and they're saying, this is what God's saying, this is the way it's supposed to be. So for them to desegregate was to go against their religious convictions. So from the very beginning, they are fighting against the civil rights movement. It is that exact same mentality in the South, where 100 years before they used the Bible to justify slavery. They used the Bible to justify slavery, and 100 years later, they used the Bible to justify segregation. And when the state starts to prevent them from segregating their private Christian academies, they all come together. They all unite in an organization known as the moral majority. I just like to point out, like, if you put the moral majority on that one of those balances, right? What does that say about the minority? Would that make them the immoral minority? And so just the whole title itself, moral majority, kind of really puts it, I don't know, it's just wrong to me. So go on to YouTube and you will find the people involved in that speaking about it openly. The leading evangelicals of the time formed the organization called the Moral Majority. Their purpose was to turn the evangelical leaders and the evangelical church from being just a religious organization to an active political organization. With which party of the US government did they intend to unite? The Republican Party. They did not unite with both. They chose the Republican Party because it had close to the same ideals as they had regarding the civil rights movement. So they all unite. Then in 1979, they form the Moral Majority, and they start turning the evangelical churches into tools of political activism. They start calling on their church members to vote. In past presentations, we read through all of the quotes straight from their mouth, where they speak about how they want to reshape the United States after Christian principles, and they are going to do that through the US government. Just another way of saying break down the separation of church and state. Make the church use the state to enforce the morality, of the majority, where the majority is the evangelical churches in America. What evangelical leader led the charge of the Moral Majority? It was Jerry Falwell. In fact, it was Jerry Falwell Sr. was the leading evangelical that led that charge. He was extremely conservative and deeply set into racism. Connected to this, with their issues with the civil rights movement, you also have this white nationalism. We read quotes of Jerry Falwell where he spoke in anger that there were communities in the cities where his friends lived, nice white families, friends of his pastor, and a black couple moved next door. He was angry that there were black couples moving in next to the white couples in these communities. There is this connection to white nationalism, and connected to this white nationalism is the evangelical charge known as the Moral Majority. Plus, it is the end of the Cold War. So what kind of power, question? Okay. What kind of power did the United States become as the Cold War ended? So we use the term unilateral. In prior presentations, we have gone through the 3 different types of powers, unilateral, bilateral, and multilateral. In a unilateral world order, how many superpowers do you have? We have 1. In bilateral, bi meaning 2, how many? You have 2. And in multilateral, how many? You have many. At the beginning of our reform line, the world goes from what type of order to what type of order. So at the beginning of our reform line, so that's during Reagan with and Bush, right? It goes from bilateral with the Soviet Union and the United States to unilateral. So it goes from 2 world superpowers, the United States and the Soviet Union, to 1 world superpower, the United States. It becomes a unilateral system where just the United States is the world superpower, which really became quite quickly a world dictatorship until they were again restrained. So we are going to discuss this history of 1989 to 1991 and what it looks like. Who wanted a multilateral world? Mikhail Gorbachev, so the Soviet Union. So in this history, when we talk about 1989, you have the world going into what you would call a new world order. The new world order is bilateralism changing into a different type of lateralism. Gorbachev called for multilateralism, and the United States called for unilateralism. So you have 2 world superpowers. Gorbachev says if the Soviet Union is not going to be a superpower, then we just have to have many superpowers because we cannot have the United States having that much control. So multilateralism is Gorbachev's type of world order. That is what he wants. What is another word for multilateralism? And that would be globalism. Gorbachev, at the end of the Cold War, starts talking about a new world order. And when he says a new world order, he sees that the time in which the world is bilateral, with the Soviet Union and the United States holding each other in check, is coming to an end. As it is coming to an end, Gorbachev starts to speak about his desire for a new world order where the UN and globalists run the world affairs. So you have the UN globalism under the multilateral with many. Is this what happened? No. When Gorbachev starts talking about this new world order, George Bush Sr. steals this term of Gorbachev's. Bush Sr. publicly stated later in his autobiography that he would never accept a multilateral world. Why? Because he said there is no substitute for American leadership. He wanted a unilateral world order. So Gorbachev starts talking about this multilateral world run by the United Nations, what we would term globalism. This idea dies in the water because as the United States becomes the world's superpower in the 1989-1991 history, they steal that phrase from Gorbachev's New World Order and they give it another definition. So they suddenly twist it. On September 11, 1990, George Bush gives his speech in Congress titled Towards a New World Order. And what he does is he takes Gorbachev's definition of the New World Order and he says we're not going to accept that type of world order. He says there is no substitute for American leadership, and from then on determines to have a unilateral world order. And if anybody's interested in that speech, there's a link to it in the presentation. And that's the actual presentation right now. And this one is the actual presentation videotaped on YouTube. So this is where Adventism starts to trip up over conspiracy theories about globalism, especially as Adventism has imbibed the conspiracy theories of Walter White. We keep saying this is the threat, that how globalism and the United Nations are the threat, and that is what defines the New World Order. But the New World Order as multilateralism was Gorbachev's idea, and he was just the dying king of a dying kingdom. The United States reinvented the New World Order into unilateralism, or what you would call nationalism, a one world superpower. So that is a brief introduction to the history of the 1989-1991 New World Order that begins to be introduced. As we go into our application of the two world wars, we're going to discuss that history, which is why we needed this revision or review. You see that in this history with Reagan and Bush, the world is headed into this new world order, this nationalistic world order that is headed or led by a largely unrestrained United States. And so I have to mention in here, I just finished watching the presentation, I think it was this morning. I think it was maybe the fourth one in the, what has she just got, in Brazil, it's called Nationalism, and she applied this same multilateral, unilateral thing to Elder Pippinger, where he was making comments saying that leaders from other countries could not dictate how we interpret politics, because they don't understand American politics. And so she was basically saying that, you know, that only the United States could rule the movement, and that would make it unilateral. But what the system that Elders Tass and Parmenter have is a multilateral, globalistic type of view of the way they are running the movement. And that's how she applied that to the internal, whereas this is all external right here with presidents. So if this here is Reagan, is how our reform line begins, how is it going to end? Of course, the same, right? Is Donald Trump part of the political establishment? No. What was his job function before he became the president of the United States? We could say a businessman, but he had actually stopped doing proper business deals long before. He made most of his money off of television and reality shows. He was a celebrity. Reagan comes out of Hollywood, Trump comes out of Hollywood. Because of their racism, Jerry Falwell united the religious right to elect Reagan with the majority of the white evangelical vote. Early in 2016, not many evangelical leaders have endorsed Donald Trump. There has been a sense of fear to do that. But then one man stands up and says, I am endorsing him, and you all have to endorse him too. And who was that? Jerry Falwell Jr. So Jerry Falwell Jr., his father, Jerry Falwell Sr., was the one who endorsed Reagan, and Jerry Falwell Jr., the son, is going to endorsed Donald Trump in 2016. So he leads the evangelical world into unity on that subject, and he wins Donald Trump the presidency with 81% of the evangelical vote. Celebrity elected by the evangelical drive, driven by white nationalism. What do we expect to see? What do we already see signs of happening? It is headed back to a nationalistic world order, and we know prophecy foretells it will be unilateral. And as we have been saying throughout the year, we need to let go of our conspiracy theories that call globalism the threat. Globalism is the restraint, not the threat. And so you can see here she's connecting Reagan with Trump. So when you see our reform line and we see the structure, we know that God works by telling us the end from the beginning. You see the connection with George Bush Sr., George Bush Jr., with Clinton and Obama. But if you want to understand Trump, first place to go back to is Ronald Reagan. see how Ronald Reagan was elected, what type of man he was, how he got elected, and what eventuated from his election: the fall of the Soviet Union, the fall of the King of the South. So at the end, we will have a fall of the King of the South, the completion of Daniel 11:40. We also see in this structure just why it had to be Donald Trump who won the 2016 election. We were saying earlier in 2016 that we knew that whatever president won that race, they would be the last president in the United States. We identified that prophetically. Then come the days before the vote, the days before November 8 and 9, 2016. Who were we saying would win? Some places were bold enough to say Donald Trump. But many areas of the movement failed. They were saying it could be either Trump or Clinton. Why? Because Clinton is a UN-connected, George Soros-connected, Rothschild-connected globalist. And we still had our conspiracy theories. They blinded us from being able to identify that it could not be anyone other than Donald Trump, because we were still holding on to that baggage. We could not see clearly who had to win that election. The structure tells us it was a Republican that brought about church and state in the history of 1989, a Republican in 2001 with 9/11 and the Patriot Act. And it was the Republican government, even in the Obama years of 2014, that did that work. So we should have known that the party that has begun the work with the Protestant churches of America is the Republican Party. The structure tells us that it had to be Donald Trump. And Hillary Clinton really wasn't a celebrity or a white nationalist. So it couldn't have been her for more reasons. So in the last few days of our movement, now that we have had this shaking and those who used to be among us have left, I keep feeling like we are turning into a bit of the tabloids. I keep finding out things about myself that I did not know about. So apparently I am autistic and all kinds of things. So daily it is quite a surprise. But one thing that they are attacking this movement with is they are saying that I predicted last year that Donald Trump would be impeached and removed from office on November 9th, 2019. Elder Jeff, FFA particularly, are saying that I made this prediction that Donald Trump would be impeached, and by impeach, completely removed from office, and that he would be impeached on November 9th, which is today, or about the same, or about to be today in the United States, 2019. The problem that they are having in attacking us is, what did we say about the messages? If you reject the first, can you be benefited by the second? No. If you reject the second, therefore, can you be benefited by the third? No. The problem they have is they rejected the message of 2012. This shaking, this split, has been 7 years in the making. It is prophetic. It is not moral. It is not a disagreement between people who do not get along. It is a prophetic issue 7 years in the making. And because they could not be benefited by the second angel's message that was formalized in 2012, when we come to this history of 2018, it is not just that they cannot be benefited by it. Elder Jeff has said that from the time I started presenting last October, not only did he intentionally pay no attention to what I was teaching, he very quickly stopped watching altogether. So most of what I have taught this year, he has never watched. And what I taught at the very beginning that he may have watched, he has said that he intentionally did not pay attention to those presentations. So now he comes to a time when he wants to attack what I'm saying. And the problem he has is he doesn't actually know what I'm saying. So first of all, they have to invent our message. So they will actually have a message they can attack. This is why we keep finding out that they are saying certain things that we have never said. They stopped listening to the message a long time ago. And the reason why they just could not even watch it, I would suggest, is because of the issue of 2012. It has been years in the development. Most of the people who have left, they reject the message of the two streams of information presented last October and throughout the year. The issue they have with the message is that when you address the subject of two streams of information, you make the subject very clear without thinking of morality, like morally good or morally bad, like Trump is bad and Clinton is good. And when you come to this 2016 election, we teach that it could be Trump, and they reject that. They would say this could be Trump or Clinton. They are both as wicked as each other prophetically. We teach it had to be Trump. He is the only one that fits that prophetic narrative. So based on our understanding that it had to be Trump, why would we teach that he is going to be removed from office? We are the ones saying that the last president had to be Trump. It can be no other. I want us to see, even just on this simple chiasm, this simple structure of the presidents on the line, not how we knew that Trump was the last president. We had other logic for that, but just how the structure supports that. With the end from the beginning, you have the perfect picture. In answer to those who are perhaps hearing these things and confused, I have never taught that Donald Trump would be impeached on November 9th, 2019. What I did say on tape last year, since October 2018, is that based on the 151 and our understanding of the time spans that this year 2019, that Donald Trump has to be impeached. Prophecy shows us Donald Trump would face an impeachment proceeding. An impeachment does not mean someone is removed from office. We used for this logic the impeachment of Andrew Jackson, who in 1858 was the first US president ever impeached. It does not mean he was removed from office. All that it means is there were impeachment proceedings. We use this understanding of 1858, our understanding of the 151-year principle. 2019, we made the claim that in the year 2019, Donald Trump would face impeachment proceedings. One of the many things that we expected that has been and is being fulfilled. But to say that he is removed from office is a fabrication of our message. There is no prophetic license for that. This movement, more than any other group, recognizes exactly who Donald Trump is prophetically. We are not expecting his removal, period. I wanted to do this for two reasons. First of all, to give us this picture so we can see Donald Trump connected to Ronald Reagan, and just in this simplistic way, see the connection between Reagan and Trump, how much of their history starts to line up. The second reason that I wanted to briefly mention this was to again mention the history of the Gulf War and the first Iraq War with Saddam Hussein. Because we go into the history of World War I, we must review that. So how do we know what the third woe looks like? Because it is not described in the Bible. So the triple application of prophecy. The first woe plus the second woe equals the third woe. Simple mathematics. The first plus the second equals the third. Can anyone think of any others? We have a few in history, but we use the triple application of where we use the triple application of prophecy. The first woe plus the second woe teaches us how what the third woe looks like. We recognized for a long time that to understand the final war between the king of the north and the king of the south, at the end of the war, at the end of the world, a world war, there has to be a World War I plus a World War II, which equals the World War III. Again, what was the threat in World War I and World War II? Was it globalism? Multilateralism? No. You had a unilateral superpower that started to act like a global bully or a global policeman, Germany, in both histories. We have gone into the history of Germany. We have seen the Millerite history, 1798 to 1844, a 46-year history. you start to see the resurrection, the coming up of modern Israel. We connected that to the 1899 to 1945 history. This first attempt to resurrect modern Babylon. First and second angel's message, the history of 1798 to 1844, the history of the first and second World War, 1899 to 1945. The first angel's message is not public knowledge in 1989. William Miller is about 16 or 18 years old here in 1798, and it takes years for him to start studying that message. In 1989, World War I, the groundwork was laid for that with the first, I couldn't understand what she was saying here, and it kind of sounded like she said first hate conference, but I played it over and over, couldn't get it. And I can only think that maybe she was talking about Hitler and hate conferences, or if somebody else knows the real answer to that, jump in. So it takes years before it begins, but you can trace it to these dates. There are 46 years of modern Israel and 46 years of modern Babylon. There is an overthrow within the leadership of the Protestantism of God's church. As you see a new leadership take up that mantle, Adventism, you see a new leadership rise up within the Catholic Church, overthrow it, and reconstruct it under Pope Pius XII. We have made all those parables between the true and the counterfeit. In this history, we recognize the significance of World War I and World War II, the impact they had globally, and the impact they also had within the churches. So if anybody has any questions, just holler, because I can't check the chat, but it isn't looking like anybody's chatting. So any questions so far? Cool. All right. In our last presentations, before we closed yesterday, we had a revision to the history of World War II. I just want to lay out what our conclusion was. So in the Iron Age, what type of weapons did they fight with? Iron. Hague Conference. Okay, so what was the Hague Conference? Brother Fell.
I'm not sure, but I think that's what it was called. But I'm not sure what it was. Guess we could look it up.
Yeah, Sister Debbie sent us a link. The Hague Convention. Okay, so that was in the Netherlands in 1899 to 1907. The first conference was convened at the invitation of Count Michael and the ministers of foreign affairs, the Tsar Nicholas of Russia, in his circular of January 11th, 1899. So 26 nations were represented, yeah. Only 2 American countries participated, the United States and Mexico. Okay, so they, a revision of the unratified Brussels Declaration of 1874 regarding the laws and customs of land warfare. Conference met from May 18 to July 29. Cool. I think this makes way more sense than the Hague Conference. I don't know. So thank you. The Hague. Okay. Awesome. So thank you very much for doing a search on those, because that makes a lot more sense. Okay. So okay, so based on multilateral treaties. Cool, thank you very much. That makes way more sense. Okay, so in the Iron Age, what type of weapons did they fight with? iron. In the Stone Age, they used stone. In the Bronze Age, they used bronze weapons. And what age are we in now? We're in the information age. And so what weapons are we using now? We're using information war weapons. So what year was the information age's big bang? So, and that was in 1989 with the invention of the World Wide Web. So that made it a whole lot easier to have an information war. That's how we got the information title, information age. And so we are in the information age, and it is an information war. You fought with stone weapons in the Stone Age, and so the information age, they fight with information weapons. That is a whole different study, and I am just reminding us of this conclusion. Okay, so now we're going to move on to Daniel 11, 3 and 4, and Alexander's generals. And this is the history that she started with that will pull together the application for World War I. So then we went to the history of pirates. We will turn to Daniel 11:4. It is the same history as in Daniel 8:8. But we will read from Daniel 11:3-4. So, and Daniel 11:3, Daniel 11:3, and a mighty king shall stand up that shall rule with great dominion and do according to his will. 11:4, and when he shall stand up, his kingdom shall be broken and shall be divided toward the four winds of heaven, and not to his posterity, nor according to his dominion which he ruled, for his kingdom shall be plucked up even for others besides those. And a mighty king shall stand up. Who is that? That is, so who is the mighty king that stands up? Alexander the Great. In verse 3 and 4, it gives us the history of Alexander the Great and his death. And after his death, in his kingdom is divided up between the four generals. So he dies in 323 BC. So how historically accurate does that account seem? I would suggest it's not that accurate. So in 323 BC, when Alexander dies, there are many generals. Then over 4 wars, the Diadochi Wars, 1, 2, 3, 4. So the many generals, they quarrel and they war against each other over that territory, splintering his kingdom until the number of the generals goes down. Over the first 2 Diadochi Wars, from 323 to 316, about 7 years, the number goes from many generals to 5 generals. So there's 5 generals right here. So prior to 316, they have been fighting against a general known as Eumenes, and that's in these years here. At the death of Eumenes in 316 BC, one general becomes the most powerful of any after the death of Alexander that existed in that kingdom, and that's Antigonus. Antigonus was so powerful, the other 4 members, remember we have the 5 generals, so 1, 2, 3, 4, these 4, Cassander, Lysimachus, Seleucus, and Ptolemy, those 4 comprise the 4 winds of heaven, and these are the 4 famous generals. But in 316, there are not 4, there are 5, so you have these plus Antigonus, being Antigonus being the most powerful, that he was equal in strength to these 4 combined. So from 316 to 301, these 4 generals in an alliance, also known as the Allies, fight against the most powerful general, Antigonus, in the Third and Fourth Diadochi Wars. So how many years is that? That's 15 years from 301 BC, or 316 to 301, and this is the Battle of Ipsus. And Antigonus was killed here at the Battle of Ipsus. And we have the kingdom divided into the 4 winds of heaven. So that would be Cassander, Lysimachus, Seleucus, and Ptolemy. And so how many years was it divided into 4? Around 297 BC is when Cassander dies. And so that's just for 4 years. So from 301 to 297, there are 4 generals. And how many generals do you have after Cassander dies in 297? You just have the 3. And then after that, for a long time, there are just 3 generals. And then she doesn't talk about it, but then Seleucus dies, and then you end up with just the 2, the north and south, Seleucus and Ptolemy. So this is what the history of Alexander's territory, our kingdom, looks like after his death. You have the death of Alexander right here, 7 years later. You have the 7 years, you have many generals and then fighting over a completely splintered empire until 316, when there is 5. Then you have 15 years of war between the most powerful Antigonus and the 4 other generals. And then in 301, at the Battle of Ipsus, the empire is divided into 4 winds, the 4 winds of heaven, as Daniel predicts. It is only divided into 4 for a maximum of 4 years. Some people place the death of Cassander at 298 BC, which means it was only divided into 4 for a tiny blip of 3 years, time in this history of the fall of that empire. Then for many years, it's 3 generals. So Daniel takes this history, all of what we've been talking about, and treats it like a parable. The only reason he could possibly have to skip the most momentous events, the most powerful general of that time, and go straight from one king, Alexander, to 4 generals here who become kings, Cassander, Lysimachus, Seleucus, and Ptolemy, and to skip all that other history, to skip the long period of time where there are 3 generals, and just go straight to Seleucus and Ptolemy in where there's just 2. The only reason he can have to do that is because he is creating a parable. He wants to give us a particular prophetic framework. When he gives us that particular prophetic framework, we use it as a parable, and we understand now that we can have 4 winds of heaven. We get our understanding of the king of the north and the king of the south and of east and west. It gives us all of this prophetic significance. So this is why Daniel would go into this history and just describe 323 BC. None of this between 323 and 301. And then he describes this, then he goes straight to 301, and then none of this after 301, and then he goes straight to the 2 generals that are left, Seleucus and Ptolemy. And he wants to give us a particular prophetic parable, and that is just typical. It is a perfect example of how you can create a parable from history. Daniel can look at this history through God's leading and say, I do not care about these 4 wars. I do not care about this incredibly powerful general. I do not care about the 15 years or the 22 years. I want to create a prophetic narrative. All of the rest becomes noise, irrelevant to his history. And he will just go from 1 general to 4 generals to 2 generals. So we so right here, through our understanding of the world wars, what we did is we went back into this history of the 5 generals, and we did that through Acts 27 and an understanding of Pyrrhus. And we understood that this Fourth Diadochi War led us into what history and application. So the Fourth Diadochi War took us to World War II. The Fourth Diadochi was Antigonus, the superpower, versus what were known even at that time as the Allied forces. We connected World War II and the Fourth Diadochi War and made the application that you saw in the last presentations. I also introduced us to this point. We know that the triple application of prophecy dictates that the First World War plus the Second World War must equal the Third. So when we made that application of World War II, what dates did it take us to? We saw 1989. And in 1989, you had the fall of the King of the South. What is the next waymark on that reform line? The application of World War II. So the next waymark on the reform line was 2014. And we placed 2014 that the King of the North and the King of the South would work together in an alliance. They would go into an alliance for the purpose of the 2016 election, typified in the history of Pyrrhus as a war or a battle, which is the Battle of Ipsus in 301 BC, most directly connecting with 2016. It goes from 1989 to 2014 to 2016. The year 2014 being the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact of World War II. What happened in World War II that connects the year 2016? And it's the invasion of Poland. How many fronts existed in World War II? There were two fronts that existed. There was the Western Front and the Eastern Front. The invasion began World War II on which front? The Western Front. So in 2016 began the history of the application of World War II on the Western Front. In 2019, Operation Barbarossa, World War II, was on what front? That was on the Eastern Front. What type of weapons are used today? It is information war. So information weapons. I don't know why that is there. Like a repeated question, that was sex in the wrong spot. Sorry. So since 2014, the news around the world looks so much more volatile. It looks like a war zone. If you went back to the Obama years, those were the years of peace compared to what you see now. The reason why things look more volatile, particularly the political situation in the United States, but also across the world, is due to the rise of nationalistic governments. It is with Brexit, with Bolsonaro in Brazil, with Modi in India, and with all of these nationalistic governments who are in their own way uniting church and state in their own countries. If you start to see the chaos, the battleground that is politics today across the world, you can know why it looks so chaotic. You are looking at the war on the Western Front. There are two fronts in this war. It is not all Russia and the United States. It is the United States against the United States. It's the United States against the West and against their former allies. There is the Western Front that we have been following for a few years now, and there is the Eastern Front. And we know that all the Eastern Front will look like the Western Front. So this was our understanding of World War II in a nutshell. What did we say was the problem? Why was understanding World War II not enough? So there are 25 years of our 30-year reform line that is missing. So from World War II, it starts here, but we're missing all this time here. We came to the conclusion that for a proper triple application of prophecy, we not only have to understand World War II, we also have to have a prophetic understanding of what World War I has to teach us. So when we went back into this period of 316 BC, which is what Acts 27 and the history of Pyrrhus took us to, that led us to World War II originally, the Fourth Diadochi War brought us to World War II. And the suggestion I would make, the reminder first, is that this third war, third war as well as the fourth war was a war, just one war between Antigonus and the Allied forces. So the third war and the Fourth Diadochi War had all the same players. Antigonus, the superpower, against the Allied forces. And all that they had was an armistice in the middle. And so armistice, I had to look it up, equals an agreement made by opposing sides in a war to stop fighting for a certain time, a truce. So in the Third Diadochi War, Antigonus goes to war against the allies. Then the war stops temporarily. They go into an armistice. They have a few years of peace, and then war restarts in the history of the Fourth Diadochi War. If the Fourth Diadochi War is the Second World War, where is the first? In World War I, you have Germany versus an Eastern and a Western front, and that comes to an end. And then you have a period of peace before it all starts up again. So World War I and World War II were one war with an armistice in the middle. And World War II was a direct result of World War I. The Diadochi War 3 and 4 was one war with the same parties fighting. And World Wars I and II was one war with the same parties fighting. Before we go into the history of World War I, to apply it to our time, I want us to first look at this Third Diadochi War. The fourth plus World War II taught us of our history, of our own history today, and the Third Diadochi War and World War I will both teach us about our own history today, and they will fill in that 25-year gap we have before the application of World War II. So now I want us to look at the history of the Third Diadochi War and then World War I. I have said before that in the Millerite history, it is the first and the second angel's messages that in those 46 years prepared God's people to do a work, and they failed that they failed to accomplish. In the 46 years of the rise of the modern Babylon, in the history of 1899 to 1945, you had two world wars that resulted in 1945, a bitter disappointment, and they failed to do the work. But we understand that World War I and World War II had significance for the papacy in that time. They essentially resurrected the papacy, yet like the Millerites, they failed to bring that work to a completion. So when we come to our own history, we are expected to see within our own reformed line, not just World War II, but also World War I, that will give us more detail. So here we're going to go into the 10-year moral majority Afghanistan and Iran revolution that will help fill in the space. So we will first go into the Third Diadochi War. As an introduction to that, part of the difficulty with teaching this is trying to connect the history, because even the recent history can really cause quite a migraine. So before going into that, I'm going to give some history of what led up to 1989. So this 1989, how long is the history prior to 1989? It is a 10-year history. And what do we place here for the 10-year period? So in this case, in this perspective that she's doing, it's the moral majority. But you know that there's other things too. But right now she's talking about the moral majority. And when was the moral majority formed? In 1979. And when did they dissolve the moral majority? In 1989. They said that they accomplished their purpose. They got Reagan elected, then they got George Bush Sr. elected, and then Jerry Falwell Sr. said, I accomplished what I set out to do. So the moral majority was a 10-year movement from 1979 to 1989. So we talked about Daniel 11:40 and a proxy war, the Afghanistan War. When did the Afghanistan War begin? 1979. And when did it end? 1989. We do not talk a whole lot in our movement about Iran, but I can guarantee you it has a place. We have to understand Iran. If we understand Iran, it went through a revolution that turned itself around. When was Iran's revolution? In 1979. But there was another revolution in the same year. It is that revolution that I want us to see. So in 1979, in what country was the other revolution? That was in Iraq. So there's two revolutions going on in 1979, Iran and Iraq. In 1979, there is a revolution inside Iraq that places what dictator? It placed Saddam Hussein into power. He takes power in 1979, and immediately with these two events, with the Iranian Revolution and Saddam Hussein within Iraq, the Middle East is destabilized. Two different factions within Islam begin to war against each other. Iraq goes to war with Iran from 1979 through the history of the 1980s. And I just wanted to put up a map here. So this is Iran and this is Iraq. So Iraq, this is where Saddam Hussein is ruling, right? And here's Kuwait, because Kuwait's going to be a factor in this too. And so just remember, it's that tiny blob at the bottom of Iraq, sitting up right next to its border. And this is Iran, this is the big one. So Iran is backed by the Russians. And Iraq, well, it depends. We'll listen to that. But it was backed by the US sometimes and sometimes not. And Kuwait was backed by the US, but this is all backed by Russia. So, and who supported Iraq in this war? Iraq was supported by the United States. It was supported also by Kuwait and Saudi Arabia. So Saddam Hussein, for those first years, was an ally to the United States, and the United States armed and assisted him in that war against Iran. The US did this partly because this is still the history of the Cold War. So this is, right, because Cold War is still going on right through here up until 1991 when Soviet Union completely collapsed, right? Or it collapsed in 89, but then Gorbachev was gone in 91. And so we still had this Cold War during that period of time. And and Iran had sided with who? They sided with Russia, with the Soviet Union. And because Iran had sided with the Soviet Union and was an ally of theirs, the United States naturally supported Iraq and wanted to see Iran overthrown. Throughout this war, Iraq is being given bank loans. What becomes relevant is the loans are particularly from Kuwait and Saudi Arabia. Okay. So here, I'm quoting here from an online article, Saddam Hussein's Rise to Power. I looked this up. I could not find this article anywhere, but I didn't spend a whole lot of time. So I couldn't give you a link to it. But she goes on quoting it. She says, Ronald Reagan supported Iraq during the war. He and other American leaders were worried that the religious fundamentalists of Iran's government might spread throughout the Middle East. Kuwait, Iraq's small neighbor to the south, also sided with Iraq. Kuwait's government, like Iraq's, was controlled by Sunni Muslims who wanted to prevent Iran Shiites from gaining too much power in the region. The Kuwaiti government loaned billions of dollars to Iraq during the war. I didn't change this text. Okay, so in 1988, the war ends between Iran and Iraq without victory for either side. It essentially ended in a stalemate in 1989. Tension between Iraq and the other countries begins, particularly between Iraq and Kuwait. Remember, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, and these other Middle Eastern countries want to see Iran defeated, but they do not want to go to war themselves. So they loan Iraq money, and Iraq goes to fight Iran. In 1988, Iraq has not been able to have a solid victory against Iran. That war ends, and Kuwait wants their money back. Iraq says, hold on, I was not just fighting to protect myself. I was fighting against Iran to protect Kuwait and Saudi Arabia and all these other countries. So why do I have to pay back the money you loaned me? He does not feel that is fair. So that creates this tension that arises between Iraq and Kuwait in 1989. Iraq does not want to pay back the loans it took out from Kuwait to fund that war, or from other countries, as well as including Saudi Arabia, but particularly Kuwait. So Iraq had another issue with Kuwait. The economies of both countries rely on their oil fields, and there were OPEC agreements. They agreed that Kuwait, or that other countries in the Middle East would not sell above a certain quantity of barrels of oil, because if they did, they drive the price down. Through OPEC, they had come to agreements about the quantity of oil they would sell. Kuwait was not keeping to those agreements. It was selling so much oil to enrich itself that it had driven the price of oil down, and it was costing Iraq's economy. I think they estimated about $1 billion a year. So there is also the oil issue. So another issue, this is the third one, another issue is Iraq highlighted is Kuwait's drilling. If this is the border between Iran and Kuwait. So here's Iran, here's Kuwait, and there's the border, right? And they both have oil fields on both sides. They both have refineries, drills and stuff like that, right? So if this is the middle between Iraq and Kuwait, the left being Iraq and the right Kuwait, Iraq accused Kuwait of something called slant drilling. So this is an oil field in the Iraq left, and there is some oil. And here is an oil field in Kuwait on the right, all the way over here, right? And they have their own oil fields. But Kuwait had learned to do something. Over here on the right, this is the right on the Kuwait, near the border, they had built a drill. And they had learned how to slant drill down below the surface, under the border, into Iraq. So they were taking oil from Iraq's land by driving a pipe sideways. That was essentially stealing Iraq's oil. So Saddam Hussein had logical reasons to get more and more frustrated with Kuwait. Here's a quote, I'm not sure where she got this. Leaders from both countries met on several occasions during 1989, but never reached an agreement. Iraq-Kuwait relations became even more strained. In the Ramallah oil fields, Iraq insisted that Kuwait had developed advanced drilling techniques capable of slant drilling. According to Iraqi officials, Kuwait's use of slanted drilling allowed the country to steal over $2.4 billion of oil, and in 1989, Iraq demanded repayment for the lost oil. Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, and other countries had loaned Iraq money to fund its war with Iran. Now they wanted their loans repaid, but Saddam Hussein believed his war restrained Iran and protected the rest of the Arab world from a fundamentalist Islamic state power. And Saddam Hussein wanted the loans forgiven, as he had fought on behalf of all of them, but Kuwait would not forgive the loans. Then there is the OPEC agreement, the agreement that they would not release more oil to drive down the price per barrel. The oil prices had been $20 a barrel by early 1990. They were down to just over $13 a barrel. Every dollar drop in price per barrel cost Iraq an estimated $1 billion per year. So every $1 drop in price, Iraq lost $1 billion per year in dollars. So really $7 billion a year. So I don't think I said that right, but yeah. Tessa said $7 billion a year, so I'm not sure how she figured that out. Oops. But that's what she was saying. And I didn't do the math. So Saddam Hussein is becoming more and more frustrated with Kuwait, and he starts testing the waters to see whether or not he is going to be able to go to war with Kuwait without the United States or the West or any other country preventing him. He comes to the conclusion that it is safe to do so. And it appears that the United States, whether they intend to or not, at least at that time, gave him the impression that they would not interfere in any of the Middle Eastern politics. So in 1990, Saddam Hussein invades Kuwait. He quickly takes over the country and now begins all of those politics within the US government. How do we respond? At first, many people did not want to get involved, but when they started to see the issue by taking over Kuwait, Iraq now controlled 20% of the world's oil supply. Okay, so this quoting President George Bush Sr., Iraq's invasion of Kuwait posed a geopolitical oil crisis. Our jobs, our way of life, our own freedom, and the freedom of friendly countries around the world would all suffer if control of the world's great oil reserves fell into the hands of Saddam Hussein. The United States, particularly individuals within the government and within the armed forces, start to push for a US response, but the public will not buy it. The public does not want a war with Iraq, especially over something as abstract as controlling the oil supply. They have come out of which war? The Vietnam War. They have come out of the Vietnam War feeling extremely burnt and seeing the damage and the pointlessness of war. And now when they see this conflict in the Middle East that looks like both sides might have a point that does not directly impact the United States, the opinion of the vast majority of the population is, why would we send our sons to die on that battlefield? So what they have to do is manipulate public opinion. And this happens in the history of 1991. So there was a 15-year-old girl from Kuwait, known only by her first name at that point in time, Naira. In the girl's testimony before a congressional caucus, it is well documented. You can go online and see the videos. She described how as a volunteer in the maternity ward in Kuwait, she had seen Iraqi troops storm a hospital, steal the incubators, and leave 312 babies on the cold floor to die. 7 U.S. senators later referred to the story during debate. The motion for war passed by just 5 votes. In the weeks after the girl spoke, President Bush Sr. invoked the incident 5 times, saying that such ghastly atrocities were like Hitler revisited. But just weeks before the U.S. bombing campaign began in January, a few press reports began to raise the questions about the validity of the incubator tale. Later, it was learned that Naira was, in fact, the daughter of the Kuwaiti ambassador to Washington and had no connection to any hospital in Kuwait. She had been coached all along the way with a handful of others who would collaborate the story by senior executives of Hill and Knowlton in Washington, the biggest global public relations firm at the time, which had a contract worth more than $10 million with the Kuwaitis to make the case for war with the US government. This is quoting Brent Scowcroft, Bush's national security advisor of the time. He said, at the time, we did not know that it wasn't true. He acknowledged it was useful in mobilizing public opinion. They recognized soon after that it had been a manipulated fabrication, but it was helpful to their campaign. In 1991, you have what was known as the Iraq War before 2003, and you have the Gulf War, also known as Desert Storm. People within the US military made the point in 1991 that they did not want to just drive Iraq out of Kuwait. They had an agenda. They spoke of that, not just to drive Iraq out of Kuwait. They also wanted post-war leverage over Iraq. They also wanted to decimate Iraq to such an extent that after the war was over, they would be able to control Iraq's affairs. So quoting here from the Washington Post article, Some targets, especially late in the war, were bombed primarily to create post-war leverage over Iraq, not to influence the course of the conflict itself. Secretary of State James Baker had warned that Iraq was going to be bombed back to the pre-industrial age, and the economic loss of the 43-day bombing campaign undertaken by the United States was almost $250 billion. They crippled Iraq's infrastructure, destroyed 134 bridges, 18 of their 20 power plants, industrial complexes, oil refineries, sewage pumping stations, telecommunication facilities, everything. They absolutely decimated Iraq intentionally, separate to just freeing Kuwait. The intention being to decimate the country to such an extent that it could be easily manipulated. So you can see why after this Gulf War, Desert Storm, Saddam Hussein did not easily forgive and he did not go away. In fact, if you were to see the mess Iraq is in now compared to what it was back in its early history, they decimated the country. So this quoting Colonel John Ward in the Third Deputy Director Strategy. Okay, I think this is in a document called the Third Deputy Director Strategy Doctrine and Plans for the Air Force. I couldn't find that either. So he agreed that one purpose of destroying Iraq's electrical grid was that you have imposed a long-term problem for the Iraqi leadership that it has to deal with at some point. Saddam Hussein cannot restore his own electricity. He needs help. If there are political objectives that the UN has, it can say, Saddam, when you agree to these things, we will allow people to come in and fix your electricity. It is to give us a long-term leverage. So this is just reinforcing my previous point. This is an article from CNN dated January 17, 2001, before 9/11. It is talking about that war. They quote James Baker, his warning that Iraq was to be bombed back to the pre-industrial age. They did almost $250 billion damage within Iraq, and they say they are quoting an analyst from the Moscow Carnegie Center, Dmitry Trenin. So he says a lot of people sitting in Moscow would say this was the first time that the United States started to act as a global policeman, that there was no counterweight to the great might of the United States. Since then, Russia has endeavored to maintain a level of influence in the region. So here, using these words, she's connecting it back to the Hitler, right? In World War I, where they were being a global bully or global policeman also. As we said before, the Cold War is ending. The United States is beginning to act in a unilateral fashion. They began to demonstrate that immediately. This was the first time the United States started to act as a global policeman. There was no counterweight to the effect of the United States because there was no way that Iraq could go to the Soviet Union, who they had an alliance with, and ask the Soviet Union to protect them. The Soviet Union was already in the 1990-1991 history. It was already crippled and about to die, so there was no restraint to the United States. So we have this early history, the beginning of our reform line. So often we so often talk about Afghanistan and the Soviet Union. I want us to see that thread with Iran, Iraq, and Kuwait. Okay, so now we're going to go back to the Third Diadochi War. For time, we are going to skip through this really quickly. We talked about the Third and Fourth Diadochi War, one war with a break in the middle, and World War I, World War II, they are one war with a break in the middle. The Third Diadochi War is the war that causes Antigonus, our superpower, to go to war against the Allies. Prior to this, there had been no major conflicts between our allies and Antigonus. Antigonus, as well as the Allies, had a common threat. they had one common enemy, and that was a general known as Eumenes. There has been this ongoing war between Antigonus versus Eumenes. At this point in the breakdown of Alexander's empire, there are two superpowers. It is a bilateral world order. Eumenes had the most specialized fighters that had fought for Alexander the Great. They were known as the Silver Shields. By the time they are fighting in Eumenes' ranks, they are men well into their 70s, but they were so highly trained, they were still the most formidable force that was at that time. They were what you might call today like the Special Ops Team or Navy SEALs. They were Alexander's Navy SEALs. They were fighting on behalf of Eumenes. It made him extremely powerful. Antigonus was also extremely powerful. They were the two most formidable generals, and they were going head to head. Eumenes was the most powerful general in the East. He controlled much of the eastern part of Alexander's empire, and he had united the eastern satrapies all against Antigonus. He controlled the Silver Shields, Alexander's elite fighting force. And satrapies, I don't think I'm pronouncing it right, but it's plural for satraps. And satraps are a noun, and it's a governor of a province or the Hellenistic empire. So basically, Eumenes had united all of the governors at that time under his power, or most of them. So Eumenes and Antigonus had been fighting in the time previously up to this point. So they had been fighting up in the first and second, out back here. And there are a few different battles, but we will not go into them. It finally comes to its completion. The final battle, it was the Battle of Kabini. Now in this battle, and the ones prior, Eumenes was fighting against Antigonus, but Antigonus had a couple of allies. There was a couple of other generals fighting on behalf of Antigonus, supporting him in this war. And I want us to consider those two generals briefly. The first general was Seleucus. So Seleucus at this stage did have Babylon, but he did not have it to such a great extent. And they do not mark the beginning of the Seleucid dynasty here. We will see it begins some years later, and he did have Babylon, but he quickly loses it at that time. The other general is Python. Eumenes unites the eastern satraps against Antigonus, and Eumenes is expecting that Seleucus and Python might join him, but they do not. They continue to support Antigonus, and they make Eumenes' life hard. At one point, Eumenes was trying to conduct a river crossing with all his men, and Python and Seleucus catch him, and they attack his forces. He just manages to get his whole train across the river, barely. So we see in this history Antigonus being supported by these two other generals. Eumenes comes across Seleucus, and Seleucus also attacks his army. And the Battle of Kabini ends, the Battle of Kabini ends the second war of the Diadochi. So we have the first Diadochi War, and the second Diadochi War ends right here. Okay, so regarding Python, she's just quoting here, after the second war, Python was among the most powerful Diadochi in the eastern part of the empire, and he started to build his power again. So Seleucus and Python held a fair degree of power, and they are supporting Antigonus, who is one of the superpowers, one of the two superpowers. So at this battle, the Battle of Kabini, Eumenes and Antigonus go face to face. Eumenes charges Antigonus using what mode of warfare? No, it's elephants, right? What did we say was a characteristic of all the battles of the Fourth War and Pyrrhus? Eumenes charges Antigonus with elephants. If we went back into their history, you would see the same mode of warfare that you see at all these battles. at 2016, 2018, 2019, and 2021, all of those where we see elephants as the mode of warfare, you can place at the very beginning of our reform line. Eumenes charges Antigonus with elephants. So all the elephants are running this way towards Antigonus, and it creates this huge mass of dust. So you got the mass Antigonus with the elephants charging, but as the massive elephants charge across the dusty salt plain, a huge dust cloud arises that blocks the view. Then the two armies cannot see each other, and Eumenes has made a very foolish mistake. He has left his baggage train unprotected. As the dust cloud starts blocking the view of the enemies, Antigonus sends all the men around back, and he takes the train. And there should probably be dust in here too. I just noticed that. So to block the view of Eumenes from the baggage train, there was probably dust in here too. So this baggage train was everything right here that the silver shields had ever earned and accumulated over the decades of fighting for Alexander and Eumenes. It contained all of their wealth, as well as their wives, their children, their families, everything. So Eumenes does not lose this war with Antigonus because there is no real conclusive victor. But at the end of it, what Antigonus has is all the belongings and families of the silver shields. This formidable force of Eumenes, they come to a deal with Antigonus. They go to Antigonus and say, we have worked all our lives, we want it all back. What do we have to do? So the silver shields surrender their general to Antigonus, who kills him. So Antigonus kills Eumenes because the silver shields gives Eumenes over to Antigonus. And Antigonus gives back the baggage train to the silver shields, but then he punishes them for being traitors to their boss, and they all end up being killed anyway. So how is one overthrown? You have elephants. And what do elephants represent? Elephants represent a type of warfare. We saw it through the history of Pyrrhus. It is an information type of warfare. It is the mode of warfare. So through this information war, how does Antigonus manage to overthrow his opponent? From within. Because he doesn't kill him, through this battle, he doesn't win, but he wins by getting the silver shields to give over Eumenes to him, that meaning doing it from the inside. So what we want to see, oops, it's been in the way, oops. What I want us to see in this history, the beginning, the Fourth Diadochi War that we are going to line up with 1989, we will make some applications immediately. You have two superpowers. It is bilateral. So how is the Soviet Union overthrown? In Daniel 11:40 calls it a battle. But what does a battle look like? The Soviet Union was overthrown from within. Their own people gave up the government. So we have that in history. In this history of 2018, does the United States go into it alone? No. What does Time magazine tell us? What ally did the United States have in 1989 that they called the Holy Alliance on the cover of Time magazine with Pope John Paul II? So you've got the papacy is one of the allies. And then in the history of 1989, you have a bilateral world order, two superpowers. You have the Soviet Union versus the United States. You see, so the Soviet Union, so you've got the Soviet Union and the United States, the Soviet Union being Eumenes, the United States being Antigonus. And you see that they take the baggage train at that battle, and this opposing superpower is overthrown from within. So Soviet Union is overthrown. But the United States have two key allies in that history. One was the papacy, John Paul II, and the second ally was the Mujahideen. We know that Time magazine article well. The front page cover has Reagan and John Paul II, and they called it the Holy Alliance. It is how John Paul united with the United States to help bring about the end of the Soviet Union through the Solidarity movement, and to bring about this end of the Soviet Union by overthrowing it from within. So you have one superpower. What territory does Seleucus become king of? He is the king of the north, and the papacy is the king of the north. So you got Seleucus being the king of the north, the papacy being the king of the north. Then you have Python. Now also in this history, one of the ways that they weakened the Soviet Union economically to such an extent that the people were giving up on it, perhaps the main way was through the Afghanistan war. So who was fighting on the side of the United States in the Afghanistan war? That was the Mujahideen. And the Mujahideen were used by the United States to prevent the Soviet Union from victory in the Afghanistan war. And they dragged it out so long until it decimated the economy of the Soviet Union. But then we find Antigonus, after the Second War, comes to an end. He has been aided by Seleucus, by Python, and the other generals have all been his allies, and all has been peaceful. Now, how does Antigonus feel? He has defeated Eumenes, he has taken over Eumenes' territory, and all of a sudden, he is by far the most powerful general since Alexander the Great. He decides that he is going to unite the whole of Alexander's splintered empire underneath himself. So he starts going into other generals, like the little guy's territory. He is either killing them or overthrowing them or forcing them into subjection under himself. He quickly starts to feel unhappy with Python, so he has Python killed. We read before that Python, after the Battle of Kabini, started to expand his power base, and he started to become actually really powerful. So what did the Mujahideen do after 1989? What organization did they form into? The Al-Qaeda. The Mujahideen formed directly into Al-Qaeda. They took over the government of Afghanistan in what year? In 1996. Then the Al-Qaeda take over the government of Afghanistan. Antigonus has become dictatorial. He attacks Python and has him killed. We've got in here, Python's getting more powerful, and then here he has him killed. Right here, the Mujahideen, who were allies, like Python, they were allies. They become the Al-Qaeda. They start becoming more powerful, and then everything's happened. I am quoting here from A.T. Jones' Great Empires of Bible Prophecy. After the death of Eumenes, Antigonus considered himself master of all Asia and began to destroy all governors who possessed any considerable ability, of whom Python was one. He attempted to destroy Seleucus with the others, but Seleucus escaped and fled to Ptolemy. Antigonus kills Python, and he is lording over generals, so Seleucus abandons Antigonus as an ally. So let's see, what was the relation? It says Antigonus refuses to accept, oh wait, this goes first. What was the relationship between John Paul II and the United States after the fall of the Soviet Union? And this is quoting from Livius, and Livius is a website. And Antigonus Monophthalmus was the sole ruler in the East and the strongest of the Diadochi. Ptolemy was alarmed by the growth of his power, knowing that he would be unable to retain the independence of Egypt against the united forces of Asia or of Antigonus. The conflict between Antigonus and Ptolemy was not new. For a long time, they had this tension between them. They have hated each other, but now Ptolemy recognizes Antigonus as being this great threat. Ptolemy writes to Cassander and Lysimachus, and the three men, Ptolemy, Cassander, and Lysimachus, all come into an alliance against Antigonus. They send Antigonus an ultimatum, which reached him in the winter of 316 BC. The ultimatum said that all the money that Antigonus had earned through his campaign against the Eumenes was to be redistributed among them, and he also had to redistribute the land that he had conquered. So Antigonus refuses to accept the terms of this ultimatum, and the Third Diadochi War breaks out. This being a war between Antigonus and the United and three allied forces. So Python is killed, Seleucus abandons Antigonus, and then we have those other three generals send an ultimatum to Antigonus saying, redistribute that power. So what are they saying? What are they asking for? They're saying, stop acting unilaterally. We want a multilateral world order with all the generals sharing the spoil. Antigonus will not accept that type of world order. The three unite against Antigonus, and Antigonus immediately seizes the initiative. He invades Syria to secure Phoenicia with its naval resources, which were needed for anyone who had to invade the Aegean world. And in the summer, Antigonus lays siege to Tyre, which had become independent, but was supported by Ptolemy. Antigonus is making a direct attack on the sphere of influence of Ptolemy. So you have an ultimatum and then war. You have an ultimatum and then Antigonus invades the sphere of influence of Ptolemy. And remember, we said the war over the spheres of influence. And now, as we enter the Third Diadochi War, who is Ptolemy? He becomes the king of the south. So we have to close now, so I'm just going to make a quick application. We lined up the Battle of Kabini with 1989. The world at that time goes from bilateral to unilateral. Same as here, bilateral to unilateral. Antigonus has two allies, Seleucus and Python. We see the papacy and the Mujahideen in 1989. Python starts to become powerful. The Mujahideen formed Al-Qaeda and took over the government of Afghanistan and became powerful. In 2001, we see the United States blamed Al-Qaeda, the government of Afghanistan, for 9/11, and they invaded them even though they were previously their allies. And they overthrew Al-Qaeda government of Afghanistan. In this history, the alliance between John Paul II and the United States is completely destroyed. We do not have time to go through all that now, but it is interesting how it so quickly crumbled. Like you can see this lining up with this, where Seleucus abandons Antigonus. So Seleucus would be the same as the papacy. So that alliance crumbled. That alliance between the papacy and the United States crumbled. And then you've got this ultimatum, and there'll be more. So with this history, you see an ultimatum between the three allied forces saying to Antigonus, stop behaving in this dictatorial fashion and redistribute the power you have gained. And in 2003, as this war intensifies, you have three powers, Britain, France, and Russia. We already said this ultimatum, you have Cassander, Lysimachus, and Ptolemy, king of the south, Ptolemy, so king of the south, Ptolemy, king of Russia, king of the south is Russia. And they go and they send an ultimatum to the United States, and they say you're not allowed to invade Iraq. The UN will not let you. If you attempt to do it through the power of the UN, we are going to block you. And we see that Iraq is a sphere of influence at that time in Russia. The United States invades anyway against international law, beginning with this conflict between Russia and the United States, between other countries in the United States, but particularly between Russia and the United States, that was sparked as a result of the Iraq War. So this is where becoming more familiar with our history can be quite helpful. There are good documentaries that we should all be familiar with. It was the Iraq War that turned Vladimir Putin against the West. and everything he has done since stems back to that Iraq war. He never forgave America for breaking international law in that fashion. And now, when they say, Vladimir Putin, you invaded Ukraine, how dare you? He says, you invaded Iraq. I am not breaking any laws that you've not already broken. So his sticking point, what he holds against the United States, all stems from the Iraq War. This is the beginning of the explanation of the Third Diadochi War. Is that it? I guess that was the end. Ta-da! All right, that was speed reading.
That was awesome.
Really?
Because I love that history, because that was fascinating to me, the whole thing with Eumenes and everything.
Right?
I really like that. It's a lot of information at first, but when you actually start to look into the history, it's really cool.
And making the applications, I like with repetition, I'm finally starting to get it. And with this study, I finally started seeing those connections she was making.
Yeah, this is one of those that literally everyone has to write it down for themselves.
Yeah.
It's the only way you're going to get it. But when you do get it, it like opens up a whole bucket of awesomeness.
Right. Okay, so we only have 15 minutes left, so we can do two things, or three. We could leave early, or you could present for like 15 minutes, or I could show you guys. I can go through the cards. Remember, I said I was going to do questions, and what I did was I put the cards in that the Anki app that somebody had talked about. And I created flashcards. So you guys, I don't know, what do you think?
I want to do that. I want to see it.
Okay. So first we'll go through it, and if you're interested, I can show you how I created them.
Shuffle that.
Yeah. We're holding?
I said shuffle that deck of cards.
Oh, shuffle that deck. Okay. Right on. Okay. So I have it labeled right here, Test World War I. And so I click on here. And then I click, and there are, I think I've got 83 cards in there. And I click Study Now. Okay, and so everybody open up your mics. And you guys can answer away. So on our reform line, which president has similar characteristics with Ronald Reagan?
President Bush. Oh.
Trump.
Trump.
Remember the reform line, right? And so what are the characteristics of Ronald Reagan? He was
Actor.
Celebrity.
Actor. Celebrity.
Trump.
Yeah.
Okay. So we go show the answer. Donald Trump. And then we can say if you guys were doing this on your own by yourself, if you didn't know the answer or you weren't sure and you wanted to have it again, you would click again and it would show you the card again in a few minutes. If it was good and you didn't want to see it again for another day, you would hit good. If it was really easy and you don't want to see this card again for like number 3 days, you would click 3 days. Okay, so I'm just going to click good. And our next question, on our reform line, which president was has similar characteristics with George Bush Sr.?
Junior.
Junior.
Mhm.
George Bush Jr. Okay. On a reform line, which president has similar characteristics to George Bush? I'm going to skip this one since I wrote them all out, so I'm going to skip this one because we already know that one. Okay. And on a reform line, which president has similar characteristics to Barack Obama?
Clinton.
All right. Okay. And I tried to shuffle it. I don't know why it didn't pay attention to me. I said like show it all, but it's given it to me in the order that I created the cards. So you already know this one, right? The president with similar characteristics to Donald Trump would be
Ronald Reagan.
Reagan.
right. Okay. And then Bill Clinton would be
Obama.
okay. So what war did George Bush Sr. put America into?
Desert Storm.
Gulf War.
Iraq.
Gulf War.
Yeah, so we can, it's got several names. The first Iraq War, the first Gulf War,
Desert Storm.
Desert Storm, Desert Shield, all those names would work. Okay, Desert Storm was a war with what country?
Iraq.
Iraq.
Okay. And the American public did not want the Iraq wars. What did President Bush have to do to convince the people that this?
To lie to them.
Yes, exactly.
WMD. Yeah.
Yeah, that too. She didn't mention that, but I remember you mentioned the girl that went out there and
Right.
talked about the babies they were throwing against the wall and stuff.
Yeah, and that was the first Iraq war.
Okay.
And the WM war, weapons of mass destruction, that was the second one.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we began with equality. So what are we going to finish on?
Equality.
Quality.
What was the war called that George Bush Jr. put America into?
War on terrorism.
The second Iraq War.
Yeah, yeah, and both answers, yeah. So the they call it the Iraq War, and the other one they call Desert Storm and stuff now, and they also call it
War on terrorism.
War on Terrorism. According to this movement, how do you know what the end looks like?
From the beginning.
From the beginning.
By looking at the beginning, because the end is based on the beginning. What was Reagan's occupation before he became involved in politics?
Actor.
Actor.
Hypocrite.
That's what they're called.
Right? Yeah.
Actor.
What is the Iraq War Bush Jr. started based upon? Someone said it.
Oil?
WMD.
Oil?
Yep. Weapons of mass destruction. That was the lie.
Oh, yeah.
Would it be 9/11 and terrorism?
Well, they're conspiracy theory. I should probably make that question stated better. Like, what was the lie that they created
Okay.
to get them to the public to go for it? What does the last president on a reform line look like?
Dictator.
It looks like the first one.
Yeah.
Some of them are, could have more than one answer. So how does Reagan get elected?
Cheating.
Moral majority.
Or majority.
Support from Jerry Falwell Sr. and the Evangelicals. That's a rock group. So we began on the Diet of Eden. What are we going to finish on? We said that one, didn't we?
Diet of Eden.
No, you didn't.
No, that was in your presentation.
Oh, okay. Diet of Eden. So how does Trump get elected?
Evangelicals.
Yeah.
Yep. And Jerry Falwell Jr.
Junior.
What was Trump's occupation before he became involved in politics?
Celebrity.
Yep. And what did those Southern evangelicals believe about segregation?
That it was the will of God.
Yep.
Biblical.
Yeah.
Biblically mandated. Exactly. Who was fighting on the side of the United States in the Afghanistan war?
Mujahideen.
Good job. And how many US presidents do we have on our reform line starting at 1989? So count them.
6.
Yep. And what year did Saddam Hussein invade Kuwait?
1990.
91, I think.
Oh, 96.
Yeah, it was 96. Oh, 1990. You're right. We'll have to go back to that one. That was something. Who are the US presidents on our reform line? Can you name them all?
Donald, Bush, Clinton, Bush, Obama,
Reagan,
Trump.
Bush,
Cool.
Clinton, Obama, Trump.
The Third Diadochi War, in the Third Diadochi War, who is Ptolemy? So who does he become?
King of the
To the
South.
south.
In the history of 1989, who was allied to the United States? So consider the Holy Alliance.
Pope.
Pope John Paul II.
APC.
The Al-Qaeda took over the government of Afghanistan in what year?
Was it 79?
That was after the Mujahideen. So it had to have been after.
2003.
I didn't see 2003 anywhere up there yet.
No, we're still in the senior, George Bush Senior.
96.
96, yeah.
The multilateral world order. Oh, sorry. In the multilateral world order, how many superpowers do you have?
Many.
Many.
And how do we know what the third war looks like?
My first and second.
Right. Okay. Oops. I don't know how I got to that question. I must have hit the button too many times. So I think it said how many superpowers in a unilateral. Or
One.
it says.
One.
And what was the threat in World War I and World War II?
The what?
What was the threat?
What was the threat?
That needs more specification. I'm not sure what you're asking.
Yeah. I mean, that was the question she asked, but it was done in order of the way she was talking, and so
Yeah.
it was unilateralism
Yeah.
in Germany because he
Yeah.
was acting like a global bully.
Germany.
Oh, okay.
How many years were there for generals?
4 years.
Yeah, it was 3 to 4. Yeah. And how do we know what third world looks like?
First and
In the
second.
first and second world.
What year did Alexander the Great die?
301.
3,
No, wait, what did I say?
327.
323.
321? Oh, 323. Oh, man. This
What
is why we need flashcards.
That's why we need flashcards, right?
Yeah.
So, and you can set it up so the ones that you don't get will come up again in a few turns, so you can do it again until you get it. So, what year was the information age's Big Bang?
89.
1989.
I have that written down. Where is it?
With the invention of the World Wide Web.
Yeah.
And what was the last battle in which Eumenes and Antigonus fought against each other?
The third.
The second.
It's the one with the elephant. Well, where he grabbed the bag.
Oh, Kabini. Kabini.
Battle of the
Battle of Kabini.
Besides Iran, what other country had a revolution in 1979?
Iraq.
Saudi
Iraq.
Arabia.
Iraq.
And, well, no, they didn't have a revolution, but they had a mess happen in Saudi Arabia too.
Yeah. In what battle did Antigonus die?
Ipsus.
And what year was that, do you know?
301.
So what type of weapons are used today?
Warfare.
Information.
Information.
Who wanted a multilateral world?
Gorbachev.
Gorbachev.
What year did Antigonus die?
301. We just did that.
Yeah.
It's a retest.
Retest. Who loaned money to Iraq to fight Iran?
Kuwait.
Wait.
Kuwait and Saudi Arabia.
Yeah, and some of the other countries, some of the other Middle Eastern countries. With which party of the U.S. government did they intend to unite?
The Republicans.
Yeah. At the beginning of our reform line, the world goes from what type of order to what type of order?
From a bilateral to unilateral?
Unilateral.
Yes. In 1979, there is a revolution inside Iraq that places what dictator?
Saddam Hussein.
When did it end?
The revolution or Saddam Hussein?
The one that the one that put the dictator in.
91? No.
Not yet.
89. Oh, it's the same year?
Yeah.
Tricky.
What age are we in now?
Information.
In 2019, Operation Barbarossa, World War II, was on what front?
Eastern.
Yep.
What did the Mujahideen do after 1989? What organization did they form into?
Al
Taliban.
Qaeda.
Oh, Al Qaeda.
Is Donald Trump part of the political establishment?
Part of the
No.
Iran had sided with who?
Russia.
What is another word for multilateral?
Globalism.
Yeah. When was Iran's revolution?
79.
79.
In a unilateral world order, how many superpowers do you have?
One.
One.
In a bilateral world order, how many superpowers do you have?
Two.
Two.
See that it's bilateral.
Right. In the Stone Age, what type of weapons?
Stone.
Stone.
When did they dissolve the moral majority?
89.
89.
Who were the four generals referred to as the Allied forces that fought and killed Antigonus?
Seleucus. Ptolemy,
Lysimachus. Cassander.
Yeah.
Lysimachus and Ptolemy.
The Battle of Kabini, Eumenes charged Antigonus using what mode of warfare?
Elephants.
Elephant.
What two generals supported Antigonus again? Right.
Ptolemy and Seleucus? No, Python and Seleucus.
That's supposed to be against Eumenes, but yeah, Python and Seleucus. And who supported Iraq in this war?
Russia.
U.S. Yeah, U.S.
Yes, but
Some of the questions I copied and pasted them really fast without thinking because these came in order of the question beforehand. So that question should be edited so it's clear in what war, right? So, okay, so there are, okay, right here it shows how many more. So like we've done 39 and we've got 24 more to go. So it's 8:03. We can go through the rest of them if you want. We could save it for another time, or we could stop now, or I could show you kind of how I created them.
Yes.
Guess what?
Created them.
I created.
You
Okay.
can also send the link out like he did, and people can use the ones that you created and do them.
Yeah, because I created two decks. I created a deck for this, and so I downloaded the software, and it's this one right here. So I just double clicked on this. After I downloaded it, you open it up. Comes up
There's Francisco.
like what you do is the first thing you do is you're going to create a deck right here. You create a deck, you give it a new name. So I'm just going to call it new deck because I can't think of anything clever right now. The other ones are called Reform Lines and Test World War. So if I'm going to go into Reform Lines, and if I'm going to add a new card here, what I do, so I'm in this Reform Line deck, and it's got cards in it already, and I click on Add, and then all I have to do is type in a question, something like on the priest line, what year is,
Time of the year.
how about Raffia? Raffia, time of the end, yeah, time
POM.
of the end.
POE.
And then you type in right here the answer. So the front is the question, and the back is the answer, 1989. And then you click Add, and then it puts it into that deck, just like that. That's all you have to do. And you can get clever. You can change the formatting and everything, the colors. You can make them bold. You can you can start changing fields and stuff like that. But I would recommend just doing it just simple like this until you get the feel for it, because I got all kind of goofy right off the bat and I mucked some stuff up. So just to start off, I would just click on Add, type in your question, type in your answer, and hit Add, and just do that until you get the feel for it. And then you can go in and get fun. And so did anybody have any more questions to add? I can add some more stuff to the deck, or because it's just that easy. I mean, you just add your answer or your question and your answer, and you hit it Add. You can put in tags in here, like what I was doing for this Reform Line for these cards. I added tags, so like this question would have the tag of the priest, and then I have on here like all the Methonyms, 144, and Levites. And so all the questions that were based on the priest, I had a tag for priest, and the 144, I have a tag for the 144, and then you can sort them by that, and then just show like, I just want to see all the cards in this deck that pertain to the have the tag of the priest, and then it would show me those, kind of like that. So it's really that easy.
Well, thanks for testing it out for us so that we are not so scared about it anymore.
Oh yeah, you're welcome. Okay, so once you get the card deck, so see if I can remember where I put them. Let's see, where did I put it? You can find it real quick there under Anki Deck. So I've got I created a folder under my documents called Anki Decks, and these are the fulfillment of 2019 victory of King of the South, and the World War I prophetic is the two that our brothers from somewhere else sent us, right? And so I do not have it in my deck right here. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how to add it. So if I go to decks, and I'm going to say get shared. Okay, so these are the decks that I have. These are all the ones that I've created and stuff. But I go and get a deck, and no, actually not that one. Oh, import. I'm sorry, import a deck. So import a deck, and then you go and look for that folder, and you're looking for files with this extension. So the .apkg. So APKG. Any of the files with an APKG ending will fit in this deck. So I click on that and I hit open, And now, and you just hit a close. I'm not sure what that is. It comes up. And now it has added that deck to my,
Can we look at some of it?
yeah. So I'm going to click on it here. So you can see right here that there's 100 cards in this deck. And I'm going to click, or 100 new cards that I have that haven't been answered. Like over here, we've been working on this one. There's 24 new ones that we haven't answered. And there's 34 that 24 that we've done and 39 that we haven't. So anyway, we're going to go in this deck and we just click study now. And he got really creative. So he's got pictures and stuff in here. And notice that
Yeah, there you go.
make it big, you can increase whatever picture he's added. I haven't figured out how to do this, but this is something you can do. You can add pictures. And so I'm not sure what the question is, but it's just
that blue box. You're supposed to answer what goes there.
okay. All right, so let's see.
So who versus Ukraine was it that the King of the South won in the time span of 2019?
Oh, you're
Russia.
fine. Under 24.
Wouldn't it be, was it Russia?
Let's see. He added invasion hunter Biden.
Oh, what?
Oh. Huh?
What are these based off?
I don't know. Let's go to the next one. Let's see. On October of 2019, blank ordered the withdrawal of American forces from Syria.
Trump?
Yeah, so it had to be Trump, right?
Yeah.
He is a puppet state of Russia. And so you saw what he did. He left that blank. And there's a way to make the code for that. And there's some really good, I'll have to, in the email, I'll also have to send a links to they have some training videos that help show how to do that. And you can make that as part of your answer to fill in a spot and then add more text. And so he's added this. This is where an answer goes. On 2019, who declared he was president of Venezuela, challenging Nicolas Maduro's presidency?
Guaido?
Guaido.
Trump.
Yeah, Guaido, yeah.
And then
Guaido is supported by US and Trump. Because Maduro was supported by Putin and Russia.
Okay. They even add a link to where they got the information. So you can do a lot of stuff with these cards, and it's better than paper because you can go back and edit them and stuff like that, right? And share them. So it's pretty. I knew you could put a picture in here, but this is the first time I've seen one, so this is awesome. So what kind of questions do you have? So you saw how to add it, how to import it, and what I will do in the notes, I can send the my decks, the two that I've created, and the links to the presentations that I watched on how to do them, how to create, edit the cards and stuff like that. I said it a minute ago, some videos. So any questions?
No, this was awesome.
That picture looks familiar.
What does?
I said that picture looks familiar.
Oh yeah. Was this part of your notes?
I think so.
Awesome.
I was thinking, wow, that looks familiar. I've been doing other things, sorry.
Oh no, that's really cool. Yeah, so he just, it looks like he took the picture and put a blue dot over the answer whenever he wanted, you to fill in an answer.
Oh, somebody else did that?
Well, somebody added the picture, or did you make a blue dot over yours?
I didn't do the blue,
Yeah, so he
What
took,
was it? Is there something in Spanish there? No, there's not. Lopez, okay, never mind, yeah.
I don't know who created the decks that were sent in your email. Remember the email?
I think I got them from Brother Heber.
Okay.
Mm.
Okay.
I
And so,
think that's where they came from.
awesome. Okay. And so, were you there to see me import this into the? And so he just added the pictures. This is part of the deck.
No, you're okay. I'll look at it later. I'm sorry. I don't want you to have to go through it again.
Okay, but just
I've
so
been listening somewhat, mostly.
so, does anybody else have any questions? Okay, that's all I got.
Um,
Everybody knows that Parminder is coming in September.
Yes.
I was trying to get the websites all updated.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
Can I say a couple things?
Yeah.
Please.
One, they're in Portugal right now. The videos are being uploaded to the Finn website, Finn 1844. Two, we need 6 slots filled for presentations in April. And then finally, Friday I have to work. Is there anyone who would want to take devotional over that morning? If not, I'll just cancel it. I'll just cancel it. Okay, cool. That's all.
Okay, so is
But hold on. Sorry, one more thing. In Parminder is tackling the prophetic versus moral issues. It's like a school of prophets though, so it's really long and they really take their time over every little thing. But I think it would be beneficial to learn. So anyways, sorry, Elaine. Sorry.
Could you say your 4 points again? Okay, so the last one was the Friday, and what were the other two? You said that they were posting the stuff from Portugal.
Yeah, on the Finn 1844, the German website. Because it's Tamina and she lives in Portugal, but it's in German. It's confusing, but it's on the Finn 1844 website.
They're not in Brazil anymore?
No, they've left for a while now.
Really?
Yeah.
I'm telling you, you gotta watch those videos and keep up because it's moving fast.
I'm trying. I've got an hour a day.
Yeah, I hear you.
Cool.
Yeah.
And what do they have, like 5 presentations a day?
I don't know. There's like 5 or 6 posted right now.
Yeah, there's 5 the last time I was listening to them on the way here, but I couldn't get anything out of it because the teaching ones, the way they do it at the School of the Prophets, you have to like have your Bible open, have your software open and follow along to actually get something reasonable out of it. Anyways.
That's what I'm doing, the methodology one right now, and that's what they're doing. They're trying that some of their Bibles are like new versions, and so they don't have italics. So I have to really, the way I'm trying to format this one presentation that I'm working on, it's been a little bit trying, but it's helping me learn how to use the tools. But still, you know. Because the parliamentary will talk, but then the audience will talk, but you can't hear what the audience says. You know?
Yeah. Phil,
Yes.
you were gonna say something.
Yes. I don't know which presentation, whether it's Brazil or Portugal, but I was listening to. I mean, I had it in my had the iPhone in my pocket, listening through my earbuds. But there was one particular one that there was you couldn't hear Elder Parminder because there was the mic. Did anybody else have that experience? Because of the mic, the recording, there was like background noise. You can hear people talking.
Which one was that?
So I don't know which one it was. It's one of the later ones.
In Brazil or?
Yeah, either Brazil or Portugal. You could hear people whispering.
Right.
So
I
it's
think-
like the mic. So the mic was on somewhere else or someone else besides Elder Parminder, and you could hear Elder Parminder. You know, even if you put it loud, he was. You know, you couldn't really hear him, but you could hear people, the audience, talking.
Was that for the whole video?
Yeah,
Oh, bummer.
yeah.
What was
There's
the
the
audience saying?
There's the
Well,
schedule.
they were talking in Spanish, or so I couldn't really understand.
Oh, that's Brazil.
So
Portugal.
here's the schedule, and like she said, I don't have the rescue schedule on this particular one. This one just covers our Wednesday and Friday, and then the Zoom meetings and stuff. But we would like to see 3 people, preferably a couple of the females, maybe 1 male, to do presentations and rescue. And it would be 2 of them. There's 6 slots to fill. We're looking at maybe somebody doing 3 people doing 2 each. Adriana's going to do 2. Tyler's going to do 8. And then we want to fill the other slots. And if I don't know that I could pull off anything, but if I did, it would have to be a repeat of stuff that I've already done, which I don't know if that's not a bad thing, but we'll see. But does anybody want to step up on there and be brave? What's a no?
How many presentations?
We have 6 presentations to fill, and we're looking for 3 people to do 2 each.
And that's April.
April 22nd to the 24th, I think it is. I closed that schedule down.
I can still see it.
No, I closed the other one down. Did you see the new one that I just switched to, or no? I don't think I did that right.
I see the one that says March and has all the date, but on, oh, now it's gone.
Yeah. Hang on 1 second. Okay, can you see that one? This is April for rescue.
Okay.
And I'm not sure if Victoria, I'm trying to get Victoria to do one, but she's not sure if she can do it because she's going to Canada the end of March. So you guys think about it, but think about it quick because this being early March, it gives us time to try to work it in if we can.
Adriana, what are you doing yours on?
Huh?
What is Adriana doing her presentation on?
I still don't know yet. Maybe it'll be like a consolidation of some stuff they did in Brazil, like try to squeeze some main points about certain specific topics together, like, I don't know, some King of the North, King of the South, I don't know, we'll see. But it's not going to be, I don't want to do just like 2 separate video things. I want to try to like make more sense of a lot of different information that's coming out because it's all so in pieces, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it's hard to keep track because they keep going through all the different pieces in every video. So I want to see if I could bring some pieces together in one thing and make it make sense a little better. I don't know. That was my plan, but we'll see.
I've got 3 that I'm doing in March. I got to talk to Allie because Allie's going to probably do she'll probably do May, our Zoom camp meeting in May. And but if you guys start picking up, when I finished Guadalupe, it was kind of my plan that when I finished doing the Guadalupe series and we're on number 12, there's 15, that Sabbath hour there would be opened up for others instead of me every single week. And so if that happens and other people pick that up, then I can probably pick up some in rescue.
I have a question, and then the fall camp meeting in rescue is not in October, it is in September as I look at the schedule?
Yes. Is that Sister Logina talking to me?
Yes.
I don't have the that screen up. Yes, it got bumped because Parminder, they were trying to work it out to where Parminder could come and he could not come in. And I'm getting ready to put it in the mail anyways. We just found out, I think it was just this week. And I'm getting ready to put it in the mail. I hope that didn't. And I was going to ask you too. I can't figure out why I can't get the screen back up here to see who's on here. I was going to ask you, when you asked me to text you the website, did you find what you needed? Because I realized as I was updating the website that I didn't send you the right thing, I don't think.
Yes, but I actually went through an Airbnb and we're going to try it that route.
Okay. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
That's what you wanted. Okay. That's what you
Yeah.
wanted. Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
Thank
Okay.
you.
So that was all still there. Good. Because I found out that site wasn't updated, but all that stuff always stays there. So,
Eh,
okay. So yeah, I apologize. I hope that didn't mess you up.
That's okay. No.
Because is it April you're looking for accommodations, or was it for October?
No, it was the April.
Oh, okay. Oh, good. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, I apologize. We were just finding
Thank you.
out. I've just been trying to, that's what I was trying to do tonight, is get the DVDs in the mail and update in the mailing and then put it out. I just put it all on Facebook, but I didn't have everything updated.
Mhm.
So yeah, he's coming in. We'll have Tamina. I'm pretty sure we're going to have Tamina too. I think that was confirmed, but I have to double check that WhatsApp message. But I think that was confirmed. So it'll be September instead of October because he wasn't able to make it in October.
Okay.
Hopefully that works for everybody. And look at it this way, if everybody's so quiet about asking somebody to fill a couple of slots, that's no slots anybody has to fill in September. So it'll all be covered.
How long will the presentation slots be in April?
In
So
April?
they're an hour and a half each?
No, just an hour.
An hour, so that's 2 hours to
So if
fill?
you like did one long one and split it into two, you could do that.
It's pretty easy.
Yeah, there's a couple of presentations that I was thinking about doing on the reform lines, clearing them up a little bit.
Just a matter of whether or not you can pull it off, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I know we're all pressed for time.
Well, when are you going to start doing the Brazil things where you wanted to put it in a book and I was going to start editing them? When are you going to start doing that?
Oh, yeah, huh?
Is it-
I think I was needing more editors, and I did briefly email exchange with Brother Fell and Sister Logina, but they don't have publisher. So it would be best if it was the publisher ones that were edited. So it'd have to be people that do have publisher.
So I couldn't do both. So I could either volunteer to do 2 presentations at Rescue in April, or I could help you with the publisher thing now, or I would have to help you after April for publisher.
Yeah, I forgot about that because I kind of wanted to be able to hand them out in April.
Okay.
And I know I don't have time to do that editing either. My plate is full. So we can all retire, right?
Yeah, right. Or we could just get them ready to go in September. Publisher.
Yeah, I kind of want them sooner, but maybe I'll put a word out to Tamina because we helped on their end. Maybe there's some that have publisher that can help us on our end. We'll put it in WhatsApp and find out if anybody can help. But then I have to be able to get the files to them, right?
You just post them online, like on your website.
They're in publisher though, so they're a little bit. I don't know if a publisher will upload. It might, but I don't know if it does.
Good.
Because they'll need, and I don't want to try to. They'd have to be reformatted to go into Word, and for that I might as well edit. You know what I mean?
You should be able to upload any kind of file to the website. The only thing that's a drawback is the size, and usually your publisher files, I've seen those lines. It might
Yeah,
be,
they're going to be bigger.
yeah.
I think it's a 10 megabyte per file, so doubt it that it would work. But I was thinking they could go on if they're in the OneDrive. But is it OneDrive? Is that what it's called?
Google Drive.
No. What's the one you use for Office? Isn't it OneDrive or what's it?
Yeah, OneDrive.
OneDrive. Okay. Because if they're on there, then can people access them or only I can access them? Yeah.
I mean, if you can get a shareable link, then it's accessible, but I've never seen, because I'm not the drive, but I'm thinking the cloud.
Okay.
I don't know about the drive. I'm sure there's a drive, but can't you put it on Google Drive?
Yeah, I could do that. I'd have to upload each one. Yeah, I can do that and get the shareable link because they're too big to email. Or we just print them with typos.
So you decide, would you prefer I volunteer for 2 presentations in April or with publishing?
I think I'd rather you volunteer for presentations in April.
Okay. Okay. Then,
Okay,
okay, then I'll start working on 2 presentations.
okay,
So that'd be a total of 2 hours,
okay.
right?
Yeah, 2 hours.
Okay.
And then we're here in March. We've got April full and we're starting to work on May. So everybody keep that in mind. I know Tony's got, I don't know if she's still with us or not. I can't see anybody for some reason or other. But she's got quite a few slots on here, but she's got a whole bunch of presentations that she's got ready. I don't know how she's pulling that off, but she is. But she's got a lot of
She's becoming our #1 transcriber is what's happening.
yeah, she's learning to do lines and it's like, so yeah, so she's come a long ways with that computer.
Yeah. See, no one has any excuse, man. I'm telling you, this message has made us all way more capable and smart than we ever were before.
Yeah, yeah.
Is it Sister Jackie that was going to start a presentation? She just got a new computer and she was going to need help.
What'd you say?
Was it Sister Jackie? That
Yeah,
just-
she's up here. She's gonna need some help, I know. And she's not with us tonight either, is she?
No, so did she get a hold of anybody?
She's emailed me a couple questions and so far I've answered her questions, but she's working between a tablet and her phone, I think.
If she just tells us the name of the video she wants to present, we can just pull the transcript off YouTube and prepare it for her so she can go do the corrections. That way she's still learning.
Well, the
from it.
one she initially gave us was the world learns from God's people.
Oh, did anyone get her that transcript?
I don't think so. Do you have her email address?
Yeah, I do,
Okay.
from the devotional group. I'll send that to her.
Okay. Okay, and I don't know if she's changed her mind, but that was what she tentatively said. And I know she's pretty, nervous about being able to take care, get the process done.
So I don't have her email. So if you want to send her my email, if she has any questions, that she's welcome to ask me also.
Okay. Okay. I will do that. And so we're going to put Christine in here somewhere. I know the Seleucus family, they're not able to make it.
Yeah, that would have been nice if we could have gotten YPG to do.
I know.
Oh, I was so excited when I realized they could do that.
And it was my plan to do 5. We were talking about that earlier, unless anybody has any objections. I definitely want to do 5 when Tamina and Parminder are here.
A day?
Yeah, 5 a day instead of 4 a day. And I'm going to verify that with him. But if we do 5, that gives us 16. If we did 4, then everybody could plan. We were talking about this earlier, but I don't think you were there, Adriana. If we did 4, then we would do, each one would be like 1 hour and 10 to 1 hour and 15 minutes instead of, trying to keep it to 1 hour. So we could do that if you want, then we need a few less speakers.
How many less? Do the math on that. That would probably work.
4, 12, 13 total. And Parminder's got 8, 9, 10 with you. And then 11, 12.
Wait, Tyler?
Huh?
You said Parminder, you mean Tyler?
Tyler. I think I said Tyler.
You said Parminder.
Oh, Tyler has 8. You have 2, that's 10.
So just 3 more.
Yeah, and if Christine does 2, then we just need one person to do 1. Unless you want to do 3, Adriana.
I'll get back to you on that. Let me see. I'm already trying to transcribe some of the Brazil ones. So I'm going to see how I'm understanding that. And then hopefully I could get it all done by the end of this month.
Okay.
And then I would know. So,
Okay. So we'll do 4 in April. And then I'll verify with him that we do 5 here. I figure we want to, I'm thinking I want to maximize it just, but I guess it doesn't matter if there's 4 and they're longer, but I'll ask him what he wants to do.
Okay.
Okay, so we'll do 4. That cuts us down to 13 then. Okay.
So on that list, you still have Lamar on there as one of them.
Yeah, I didn't, where was that at? Right here? Okay, I'll put you there. Thank you. I was just gonna leave it and not finish. I still gotta work on my notes for Sabbath and I'm not done yet. So I was gonna be doing that during this, but I wound up having to do the updates on the website. And then I found that that separate one that has the events on it wasn't updated since October. And I was like, oh no. So anyway, so they all got updated. Okay, so we got you. I don't know if she'll be able to do one or not, but if she does just one, that would cover us. If Adriana does two, that would fill us up.
You mean 3?
If Victoria does one,
Oh, yeah.
and I don't know for sure if she can or not. So
Is she going to Canada before or after April?
what?
Is she going to Canada
Before, in March, end of March, early April, I think.
Okay.
I think it's end of March. So I did update it. I just put you on there. And these can change to however you guys can pick your time and we'll work you in however you want. Or just wherever I throw a name in, whatever you want to do.
Right.
Okay.
For me, it's better in the afternoon.
Afternoon.
Not the first one right after breakfast.
Okay.
Right? Because I'll be in the kitchen.
Okay. I'm gonna quit on that for now, so I might have to remember that later. I'll just swap you and Tyler out one. And because I'm gonna try to get the DVDs in the mail too. So okay, well, if we're ready, let's somebody want to pray, close out in prayer, and then that'll be it for tonight. I'll pray. Gracious Father in heaven, Lord, we thank you for the blessings that you bestow upon our lives. You hear, Father, that there are hearts that are willing, and yet we are all struggling with that. We all have to work. And I just pray that you would help us, Lord, to have your strength, that we would have the ability to do 1 or 2 classes each month and just go on a really good rotation basis, Father, that we could all get more and more solid in the message, more and more unified, because that's what this message does. It brings us into unity. It unifies, and sadly, Lord, there are people that leave over it. And I pray for each and every one of us, Father. I thank you and praise you for your grace and mercy in our lives, that we are this far, because we did not get this far by ourselves. We got this far in your strength and by your grace and by your mercy and by your leading. And we are so grateful, Lord. We thank you for the blessings that you've brought into this group, Father, this week. There's been some tremendous blessings that have happened that we'll just leave unspoken. But we just see your work, Father, in the hearts of your people, and we are so thankful. We thank you for the presentation tonight, for Sister Christine, for showing us, Father, how to use the flashcards, Father, that we could learn to study from, and to also quiz each other on, and test our memories and help our memories, Father. We are just so thankful. So we thank you for the blessing of getting all the arrangements made with Tyler as well, and with Elder Parminder and Sister Tamina. Lord, we just really want to step up and do more, but we're so limited, and we pray that you would clear the way, that we would not have such limitations on us, that we could be able to open up and do full schools, Father, and be prepared with the message, and prepared, Father, with courage and a forehead of flint when it's time to go to the Levites. We thank you, Lord, for the blessing of this high calling. We praise you, Lord, and we thank you, and we ask all this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.